My name is Eleanor Brooks, and I'm 55 years old. I never thought I'd find myself here, not like this, not in this cold, empty house. It's been 3 weeks since George passed away, 3 weeks since my world turned upside down, and every day feels like walking through fog. George was my everything. We had been married for 30 years, and I thought we had so much more time ahead of us. But life doesn't always give you the time you think you deserve. It takes things away, leaving you with memories that are both a comfort and a weight. This morning, the house was eerily quiet, and I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the coffee mug in my hands. It was one of those sentimental gifts, the kind you don't realize you're going to keep for years until it becomes a part of you. The mug says, "Best Mom Ever," something Lucy had given me years ago. I don't even remember the occasion, but I remember the way she had smiled, all proud of herself for finding the perfect gift. Now, that same mug sits in my hands, its words glaring at me like some kind of cruel reminder of everything I've lost. It feels wrong, heavy, like it's mocking me. Best mom ever, huh? Not so much anymore. I set the mug down on the counter, the steam from my coffee long gone. The warmth that once filled the room feels like a distant memory, and the silence has settled over me, like a blanket I can't shake off. I glance around the kitchen, and I realize how much of this place was built by George and me. The worn wood of the table, the slightly crooked tiles in the backsplash, the way the sunlight filters through the windows in the morning, it's all part of us. But now, without him, I don't know what to do with it. Every corner of this house holds pieces of our life together. I walk over to the window, looking out at the garden. The roses George and I had planted together, the ones we had spent years tending to, are now overgrown, wild, untamed. The tomato plants have taken over the little patch of soil that we used for our summer vegetables. I can almost hear George's voice, the way he would chuckle and say, "Next year, Eleanor, we'll get them under control." But next year never came, and the weeds have taken over, much like the emptiness I feel inside. That's when the phone rang. It startled me, pulling me out of my thoughts. I didn't even look at the caller ID before I picked it up. I knew who it was. It was Brian, my son. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," he said, his voice already carrying that familiar tone of impatience. The tone he used when he was a teenager, asking for money or for something that he didn't really need, but expected anyway. Now at 33, that tone hadn't changed. He still didn't get it. I let out a sigh and set the mug down without taking a sip. "Good morning to you too, Brian. What's going on?" "You know it's not practical for you to stay in this house, right?" he continued, as though it was a simple, obvious fact. "It's too big for you alone. The maintenance, the bills, it's just too much for you to handle." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I could feel the tears rising in my throat, but I swallowed them back. Brian had never been one to mince words, and now, even in the wake of his father's death, he was treating me like a problem to be solved. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't some burden to be discarded, but instead, I just said, "There's no mortgage." I kept my voice flat, like I was reading a script. I didn't need to explain everything to him. George had paid it off 10 years ago, but I'd never told them that. I didn't see the need to. It didn't matter to them. Brian laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Mom, please. We all know George's pension barely covers your expenses. You're barely scraping by, and Emily and I think it might be time for you to move in with us. We can help you get back on your feet." His words were like a slap, but deeper, sharper. My hands started shaking, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The nerve. My own son telling me what I needed, what was best for me, without so much as a thought for how I was actually doing, how I was grieving. It didn't matter. All that mattered to Brian was that I was an inconvenience that needed to be managed. "I'm not moving in with you, Brian," I said quietly, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted it to. "I've lived here with George for 30 years. This is my home. I'm not packing up my life and moving into your spare room." I could almost hear him roll his eyes on the other end of the line. "Mom, Emily and I are worried about you. This house is too much for you. We've been talking about it, and we think you should consider selling it. You'll be able to live more comfortably. And if you sell, you could help us with the down payment on that condo we've been looking at. It's a win-win." I didn't know what hurt more, his words or the way he said them, as though it was an obvious choice. I felt my chest tighten. A win-win? I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. You mean it's a win for you and Emily, and a loss for me? I'm not selling this house. You're not thinking clearly. It's a good opportunity, Mom, Brian insisted, his voice growing sharper, more demanding. You don't want to end up struggling. We already found a buyer. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. They had already found a buyer for my home, my family's home, without even consulting me, without even thinking to ask how I felt about it. The house that George and I had built, that our children had grown up in, where we had hosted birthdays, anniversaries, and countless memories. It wasn't just a house, it was our life. And they wanted to sell it. Just like that. I couldn't take it anymore. I hung up the phone before I could say anything else, my hand trembling as I put it down. I stood there, my mind racing, heart pounding in my chest. The audacity, the gall. How could they think this was okay? I walked away from the kitchen, away from the phone, and wandered through the hallway. The house was silent again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It felt suffocating, like it was pressing in on me, reminding me of everything that had been lost. And then, as I stood there, looking around the place that had been home for so long, I remembered something I had almost forgotten. A few weeks before George passed, I had gone into his office to look for a document, and that's when I found it. A set of old papers, bank statements, investment portfolios, and the deed to a small villa in Italy. I had never known about the villa. George had never mentioned it. He'd bought it years ago, not for retirement, but for me. It was a place we had always dreamed of visiting, but never had the time or money to. He had bought it as a surprise, a place for me to go when he was gone. Suddenly, it all clicked. I wasn't as helpless as Brian thought I was. I wasn't a burden. I had choices. And this house, this life, wasn't something they could take from me. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. Not like this. Not after everything George had planned for me. I had a choice, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something in me, a spark of defiance. I picked up the phone again, dialing the estate attorney George had trusted for years. Mrs. Brooks, Anne's voice came through the phone, steady and calm. George was very clear about his wishes for you. The property in Italy, it's yours. There are no strings attached. You've got full control. The weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying lifted off my shoulders in that moment. George had planned for me to be free, to live without the burden of being controlled. The villa in Italy, the investments, everything, it was mine. My children had no claim to it, and I wasn't going to let them take it. The decision to leave wasn't easy. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. Brian and Emily were already assuming I would just go along with their plan, thinking it was the only option. But I had other plans now. I knew I couldn't stay in this house forever. The walls were closing in, and the memories of George were both comforting and painful. I needed something more: space, time, a place to breathe without the constant reminder of what I had lost. I needed to find myself again, and the villa in Italy, the one George had bought for us, was the key to that. It had been a dream we had shared for years, one that had been put on hold by the demands of family and life. But now, it was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The day I made the call to Anne, the estate attorney, was the day I took control. She had been George's lawyer for years, and she knew the ins and outs of his plans for our future. When I explained my situation to her, she didn't question me. She didn't ask why I had waited so long to come forward with this information. She simply confirmed what I needed to hear. The villa was mine, and I had full control of the assets George had left behind. I could live in the villa if I wanted, or sell it, whatever I decided. I hung up the phone with a sense of finality. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. This was my chance to live my life on my own terms. No more expectations, no more pretending. The next morning, I packed a suitcase, a small one. I didn't need much, just the essentials: a few clothes, a journal, a camera, and a couple of books. I left the rest of the house behind, the house that had once been filled with laughter and love, now just a hollow shell. I couldn't look at it anymore, not the way it was now. I knew I needed to step away. I needed to be somewhere I could think, somewhere I could process everything that had happened in the last few weeks, somewhere I could heal. I didn't tell Brian or Emily where I was going. I didn't owe them an explanation. They didn't care about how I was feeling, and if they had their way, they would have sold my house without a second thought. I wasn't going to let them do that, and I wasn't going to let them dictate my next steps. I was going to Italy, and I was going to take control of my life again. The flight was long, but I welcomed the time to think, to sit in silence and reflect on everything that had brought me here. I thought about George, his quiet strength, his love for me, his support. He had always believed in me, always seen the woman I was, even when I didn't see it in myself. He knew what I needed, even if I didn't. He had thought ahead. He had known that one day I would need a space where I could breathe, where I could find myself again. I arrived in Castelnuovo a few days later, and it felt like stepping into another world. The air was different here, cleaner, lighter. The hills rolled gently in the distance, covered in vineyards and olive groves. The village was small, with cobblestone streets that wound their way through the center, lined with old stone buildings and tiny cafes. There was a stillness to it, a calm that I hadn't felt in so long. I breathed it in, feeling the weight of my grief begin to lift. The villa was just as George had described it, rustic, charming, and full of character. It wasn't large, but it was perfect. The kind of place you could get lost in, not in the sense of feeling small, but in the sense of losing yourself in the beauty of it. The walls were made of warm terracotta, and the windows were large, letting in the light. From the small terrace, I could see the Mediterranean stretching out in the distance, sparkling under the midday sun. The garden was overgrown with lavender, just like George had promised. It was exactly what I needed. Quiet, peaceful, a place to start over. I spent the first few days exploring the village, getting to know the local shopkeepers, learning a bit of the language. I hadn't realized how much I missed this kind of simplicity. No rushing, no demands, no one telling me what I should or shouldn't be doing. The people here were kind, open, and unhurried. It was the perfect escape from the chaos I had left behind. But even in the quiet of Italy, my mind was still on my children. I hadn't heard from Brian or Emily since I left. I knew they must have been wondering where I had gone. They probably thought I was just sulking, hiding away from them. But it wasn't like that. I wasn't hiding. I was living. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making a choice for myself. And I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. A few days later, I checked my phone. I had a missed call from Lucy. I hadn't heard from her since the funeral, and part of me had wondered if she would even reach out. Lucy was always the quiet one, the one who seemed to disappear when things got hard. But there was something different in her voice when I called her back. She didn't ask about the house. She didn't mention Brian or Emily. She just asked how I was doing. "I'm okay, Lucy," I said, my voice steady. "I'm starting over." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Where are you?" "I'm in Italy," I said, finally feeling the truth settle inside me. "I'm in the villa George bought for us." Another pause. "Oh, Mom." Her voice softened, and I could hear the concern in it. "What about the house? Did you sell it?" I took a deep breath, looking out at the view from the terrace. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the Mediterranean. It was beautiful in a way that words couldn't capture. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not selling it. I'm not giving it up. I'm living my life, Lucy, on my terms." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could tell she was processing everything, trying to understand. And then, finally, she spoke. "I think I understand now," she said quietly. "You're doing this for yourself, aren't you? I'm proud of you, Mom." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm finally free." The next few months passed in a blur of new beginnings. I spent my days writing in my journal, exploring the village, and getting to know the people around me. I wasn't running away from anything. I was running toward something, toward peace, toward freedom, toward a life that was mine to live. For the first time in years, I was doing what I wanted, not what anyone else expected of me. I had no regrets, no looking back. I was exactly where I needed to be. The days here in Castelnuovo passed in a rhythm I hadn't known in years. There was a simplicity to life that was both comforting and strange. I had spent so many years rushing, managing schedules, tending to the needs of others, my children, George, even the house itself, that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist. To wake up in the morning and decide what I wanted to do, not because I had to, but because I could. I found myself waking early every day, the sun streaming through the window, bathing the room in soft light. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of lavender and pine from the garden below. The birds chirped loudly in the trees, and the world felt alive in a way it hadn't for me in years. I would sit on the small terrace, wrapped in a soft blanket, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the world wake up around me. The quiet of this place seeped into my bones, slowly erasing the tension that had clung to me for so long. The first few weeks were spent finding my routine. I walked through the cobbled streets of the village, taking in the sights and sounds. Castelnuovo was small, tucked away in the hills, and the people here were welcoming, but in a way that didn't feel forced. They didn't know my name at first, but they didn't need to. They spoke to me as if I belonged, as if my presence here was natural. I learned the names of the local shopkeepers, exchanged pleasantries with the barista at the cafe, and learned to say buongiorno instead of good morning. I'd always thought I'd love to travel, but somehow I'd never made the time. Life always had a way of getting in the way. Now, with the villa and this small village as my refuge, I felt like I was living the dream we'd always discussed, but never had the chance to pursue. But it wasn't just the beauty of Italy that was transforming me. It was the absence of expectation. There were no phone calls from Brian demanding answers, no texts from Emily asking about the house. There was no one telling me what I should do, no one trying to manipulate me into doing what they wanted. I had learned, over the years, to make myself small, to bend to the demands of others. When George was alive, I had kept our lives balanced, but it was always for the sake of others. I had been a good wife, a good mother, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten how to be just me. This place, this villa, this life, was reminding me who I was before I became someone's caregiver, someone's problem solver. A month passed before I received my first letter from Brian. It came in the mail with the familiar handwriting I had known for decades. At first, I hesitated to open it. I had no idea what to expect, but when I did, it wasn't what I had feared. "Mom," it began, "I know you're probably still upset with me, and I don't blame you. I just want you to know that I'm not trying to control you, but I think we both know you can't keep this house forever. I'm not asking you to sell it, but I think it's time for us to talk about it. Emily and I want to help. Please come home soon." I stared at the letter for a long time, the words sinking in. Brian was still trying to control the narrative, still thinking he knew what was best for me. But now, with the peace of this place in my heart, I could see the truth in what he was asking. It wasn't about me. It was about him and Emily. They didn't care about my happiness. They cared about securing their future. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to explain myself to him anymore. My life was mine to live, not his to dictate. The freedom I had here in Castelnuovo was everything I had longed for. I wasn't ready to go back to the old way of things, the old expectations. A few days later, I received another call. This time, it was Lucy. Her voice was softer than usual, quieter, as if she was treading carefully around me. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything you said," she began. "I want you to know that I don't agree with Brian, but I understand why you left. I just wanted to check on you." I smiled as I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight warming my face. Lucy had always been the quieter one, the one who kept to herself, but there was something in her voice now that made me think she was growing too. "I'm fine, Lucy," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "I'm more than fine, actually. I'm learning what it means to live for myself again. I'm at peace." She paused, and I could hear the faint rustle of papers in the background. "I'm glad to hear that. I don't know if you're ever coming back, but I want you to know that I love you, and I'll support whatever you decide." Those words, simple as they were, meant more to me than I could express. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Lucy saw me, not as a mother to take care of, but as a person who had needs and desires beyond her role in the family. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet moments of self-reflection. I wrote in my journal every morning, capturing the thoughts and feelings that had been buried for so long. I took long walks through the village, sometimes alone, sometimes with Par, the neighbor who had become my closest friend. Par was a woman in her late 50s, with a sharp wit and a deep kindness. She reminded me of myself before everything changed. We'd talk about life, about love, about the past. She had a way of making everything seem simple, of reminding me that I didn't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. One afternoon, as we walked through the local market, I stopped in front of a small stall that sold hand-woven scarves. The colors were vibrant, and the fabric felt soft under my fingers. I picked out a deep blue scarf, something I would have never chosen back home. But here, surrounded by the beauty of this place, it felt like the perfect addition to my life. "I think I'll wear this every day," I said, turning to Par with a grin. She laughed. "Well, it suits you. A splash of color, something to remind you of this new chapter." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. And it wasn't just the scarf or the village. It was the realization that I had the power to shape my own story. I had been writing the chapters of everyone else's life for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to write my own. A few days later, I decided to take a trip to the coast. The Mediterranean was only a short drive away, and I had always dreamed of seeing it up close. The sea, with its endless horizon, felt like a reflection of my own journey. Vast, uncharted, and full of possibilities. I rented a small apartment near the water for a few days, just to escape, to take in the beauty of it all without the noise of the world around me. The moment I stepped onto the sandy shore, I felt something shift inside me. It was like I had finally found the peace I had been searching for. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was running toward something. Toward myself. Toward the future that had always been waiting for me. And as I stood there, watching the waves crash against the rocks, I knew this was just the beginning. I had found my place in the world, and no one could take that from me. The longer I stayed in Castelnuovo, the more I realized how much I had missed out on, not just in terms of travel or experiences, but in terms of who I was. I had spent so much of my life focusing on what others needed, what others expected of me, that I had forgotten the joy of simply existing for myself. Now, as I spent my days walking through the village, reading in the garden, and taking in the beauty of the Italian countryside, I began to reconnect with something I hadn't realized I'd lost: my sense of self. A few days after my phone call with Lucy, I received another letter from Brian. I had half expected it, knowing how persistent he could be, but I wasn't sure how to respond. I hadn't yet decided whether or not to tell him that I wasn't planning on coming back. I wasn't sure if he would understand. In his letter, he mentioned how much he and Emily missed me, how they still hoped I would come home soon, and he asked me to think about it once more. I folded the letter slowly, letting the words sink in. The message was clear. He still believed I was making some kind of mistake. That this was all a phase, that I was just grieving and needed to come back to reality. But reality was exactly what I was trying to escape. The reality of being controlled, of being expected to sacrifice my own needs for the sake of others. "Think about it," I muttered to myself, crumpling the letter and tossing it in the trash. I didn't need to think about it. I had already made my decision. The life I had here was real, and it was more real to me than any place I had ever been before. I wasn't going to let them pull me back into the life they had planned for me. Instead of focusing on Brian's letter, I decided to focus on something else, a dream that had started to take shape in my mind. I had always wanted to write, but life, with all its distractions and obligations, had kept me from pursuing it. George had always encouraged me to write that novel I had talked about so many times, but I had brushed it off, too busy with everything else. Now, with time on my hands and the quiet of Italy surrounding me, I realized that there was no better time than now. I started with the small notebook I had bought at a local shop, the pages rough and unpolished, like the story I wanted to tell. I sat in the garden each morning under the shade of an old olive tree and let my thoughts spill onto the pages. At first, it was hard. I was rusty, unsure of myself, but the more I wrote, the easier it became. The words flowed, and soon I found myself crafting a story not of fiction, but of my own life, My marriage, my children, my struggles. Writing was cathartic. It was as if every word I put down was a step toward healing, a way to make sense of all the things that had happened to me. My feelings, my choices, and the way I had been pushed aside for so long started to take shape in the pages of my notebook. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I had control over something, and the act of creating something purely for myself was empowering. The more I wrote, the more I began to look at my life from a different perspective. I wasn't a victim of my circumstances as I had once believed. I wasn't helpless. I had made choices, choices that had shaped the life I had led. And yes, those choices hadn't always been easy, but they had been mine to make. I had raised my children the best way I knew how, and I had loved George with everything I had. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of myself. I had allowed myself to fade into the background, to become the caretaker, the problem solver, the one everyone turned to when they needed something. But that wasn't who I was. I had spent so much of my life being everything to everyone else, and now, for the first time, I was beginning to see who I really was. I wasn't just a mother, a wife, a caretaker. I was Eleanor. I was a woman with her own desires, her own dreams, her own voice. As I sat in the garden, writing in my notebook, I could feel the change happening inside me. It wasn't just the landscape that had changed. It was me. I was becoming someone new, someone who had finally taken ownership of her own life. I didn't need anyone's approval, not from Brian, not from Emily, not from anyone. I had already given enough of myself, and now it was time to take back what was mine. The weeks passed in a peaceful blur, each day blending into the next. I spent my mornings writing, my afternoons exploring the village or tending to the garden. I had started growing my own herbs, just like I had done back home with George. The smell of basil, rosemary, and thyme filled the air, and it reminded me of the life I had built with him. One evening, as I sat on the terrace with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I realized something. I wasn't alone. I had always believed that I was isolated, that I had lost everything when George passed. But I had built a new kind of family here, one based on genuine connection and mutual respect. Parr had become a close friend, someone I could confide in, someone who understood me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We had spent many evenings together, talking about life, love, and our experiences. She had a way of making me laugh, of helping me see the humor in things I had once thought serious. She had lost her own husband years ago, and although her pain was different from mine, it had created a bond between us. I had come to understand that grief wasn't something you got over. It was something you learned to live with. And as time passed, it became easier to live with it. One day, as Parr and I walked through the village, I saw a woman with a stack of fresh bread in her arms. Her name was Maria, and she ran the local bakery. I had been buying bread from her for weeks, but had never really spoken to her until that day. She invited Parr and me to sit with her for coffee, and as we sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by the smell of freshly baked bread, I realized something important. This place, this village, was becoming my home, not because of the villa or the beauty of the land, but because of the people. They had welcomed me without judgment, without expectation. They saw me as I was, not as the widow who had come to hide from the world. That afternoon, as I walked back to the villa, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was running toward something, toward peace, toward healing, toward the person I had always been but had forgotten along the way. When I got back to the villa, I opened my journal and began writing again. This time, the words came even more easily. The story of my life, of all that had brought me to this point, was unfolding before me. I wasn't just writing for myself, I was writing for anyone who had ever felt lost, who had ever felt invisible. I was writing to reclaim my voice. As the days went by, I found myself changing in ways I hadn't expected. The woman I had been was still inside me, but she had evolved, grown stronger. And the life I had created here, in this small village, was everything I had needed. A second chance, a fresh start, a place where I could finally be who I was meant to be. It had been a few months since I arrived in Castelnuovo, and I had settled into a life that, while still new, felt increasingly familiar. Each day felt like a small victory. like I was rebuilding my life piece by piece, finding joy in the little things that once might have passed me by. The mornings were the best. I'd wake up early. As the first light crept through the window, the sun painting the walls with soft golds and ambers. I'd slip out of bed, take a deep breath of the cool morning air, and walk to the terrace. It was there, standing on that small stone balcony, that I began to realize I had stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to live. Instead, I was choosing it for myself. No more seeking validation from anyone, especially not from Brian or Emily. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore, and I no longer cared what they thought about my decisions. This was my life now, and I was going to live it on my terms. I spent the days walking through the village, enjoying the simple pleasures of life, sipping espresso at the cafe in the town square, talking to the elderly shopkeeper who had a weathered smile and stories to tell about the village's history, and even helping out at the local farmers market. There was something grounding about the routine, something that made me feel connected to the world around me in a way I hadn't in years. It was as though I was rediscovering the woman I had once been, a woman not defined by anyone's expectations but by her own desires and choices. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the garden, pruning the lavender plants I had grown since my arrival. The smell of the flowers filled the air, and I took a deep breath, letting the scent soothe me. I was at peace here, truly. But in the back of my mind, there was always that lingering thought about Brian and Emily, about what they might be thinking, about whether they were expecting me to return, to fall back into the old role they had cast for me. I hadn't heard from Brian since the last letter, and while part of me had expected another push for me to come home, part of me also felt relieved. I had spent so much of my life responding to their demands, trying to keep everyone happy, that the silence was almost freeing. I wasn't their responsibility to fix. I wasn't anyone's responsibility but my own. Then, one day, I received a call from Lucy. I had expected her to call sooner, but I had been content to let her come to me when she was ready. Her voice, when it came through the phone, was soft, hesitant even. I could hear the uncertainty in it, the concern she had been carrying for months. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything you've said, about you being in Italy, and about the house," she began, her words cautious, as if she wasn't sure what kind of response she would get from me. I could hear the worry in her tone, but I wasn't about to apologize for the choices I had made. Not anymore. I wasn't going to make excuses for living my life as I saw fit. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair, watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky. "I know you're worried about me, Lucy," I said, my voice steady but not cold. "But you don't need to be. I'm happier than I've been in a long time." There was silence on the other end, but I could hear the relief in her soft exhale when she finally spoke again. "I'm glad you're happy, Mom. I really am. It's hard for me to understand. You've always been the one who took care of everything, and now you're just living for yourself." Her words made me pause, and I realized just how deeply ingrained my role as the caretaker had become. It was hard for Lucy to see me as anything other than the mother who had always put everyone else first, who had always carried the weight of the family's burdens without complaint. But I wasn't that person anymore. Not entirely, anyway. "I've spent so much time taking care of everyone else, Lucy," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "And I love you and Brian. I do. But for the first time, I'm doing something for me. For no one else, just me. And it feels good." There was a long pause before Lucy spoke again. "I get it. I do. And I'm proud of you, Mom. I think I understand now why you had to do this. I don't want to lose you." The vulnerability in her voice made my heart ache, and I felt a pang of guilt that I hadn't been more present for her these past few months. But I knew, deep down, that I had to do this for myself. I had to be selfish, in the healthiest way possible, if I wanted to be the person I was meant to be. "You won't lose me, sweetheart," I reassured her, my voice softening. "I'm still your mom, just living a little differently now. I'll always be here for you, but I'm finally living for myself. And I think, in the long run, that will be better for both of us." We talked for a little while longer, and by the end of the call, I felt lighter. There was a sense of understanding between us that hadn't existed before. Lucy might not have fully understood everything. But she had accepted that this was my choice, and that was enough for me. Over the next few days, I continued to immerse myself in the life I was building here. I visited the beach one afternoon, spending the whole day walking along the shore, listening to the rhythm of the waves, and letting the sea breeze clear my mind. As I sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized just how much I had changed. The woman who had been afraid to speak up, afraid to put herself first, was no longer the woman sitting on that beach. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who had found her voice and was ready to use it. When I returned to the villa that evening, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The thought of going back to the old life, to the house and the pressure from Brian and Emily, seemed like a distant memory. I wasn't running away from them. I was running toward something better, toward freedom, toward my own happiness. As I sat on the terrace that night, the stars twinkling above me, I realized that I was exactly where I needed to be. This life, this place, had become my sanctuary, my refuge, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I was going to finish my book. I was going to live out the dreams George and I had shared, but this time they would be my own. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't doing it to make anyone proud or to meet anyone's expectations. I was doing it for me. I wasn't going to let fear or guilt hold me back anymore. I had spent too many years being the person everyone else needed me to be. Now, I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. As the weeks passed, I found myself slipping deeper into a routine that felt increasingly natural. The initial thrill of escaping everything I had known began to fade, and what remained was a quiet contentment. I had stopped rushing through each day, stopped worrying about tomorrow or about what anyone else expected of me. Each day was a gift, and I learned to savor it. Whether I was writing in the morning light, taking long walks through the village, or simply sitting on the terrace with a cup of tea, watching the sunset over the hills. There was something about this place that felt like a balm to my soul. Castelnuovo, with its cobblestone streets and colorful buildings, had become more than just a refuge. It had become my home. The locals knew my name now, and I knew theirs. I had become part of the rhythm of the village, and in turn, it had become part of me. Every morning, I exchanged pleasantries with the butcher, who always offered me a bit of cheese as I picked up my daily provisions, or the florist, who gave me advice on how to take care of my lavender and rosemary plants. I had learned their stories, and they had learned mine. Though, in truth, there wasn't much to tell. I wasn't running away from anything. I was simply living, for the first time, on my own terms. But as much as I had come to love this village, I hadn't completely left the past behind. The phone calls from Brian, always with the same plea, "Come home, Mom. It's not too late," continued to come in at regular intervals. I had stopped answering them, no longer feeling the need to justify my choices. He didn't understand, and I wasn't sure he ever would. But I was okay with that now. The freedom I had gained from stopping the cycle of constant guilt and expectation was worth the distance between us. I hadn't heard from Emily, and that, too, was a relief. It was strange how little I missed the old dynamic with them. I used to think that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water, that loyalty and sacrifice were the highest virtues. But I had learned something over the past few months. Sacrificing myself for others, my children, my husband, my family, had never really been a sacrifice at all. It had been an obligation, a sense of duty that I had let define me. I had been so focused on fulfilling the roles I was expected to play that I had lost myself in the process. Now I was learning how to live for myself, to make choices that weren't driven by the needs of others. It felt like a revolution of the soul, a quiet rebellion against the life I had been living. One afternoon, as I was walking through the market, I ran into Par, the woman I had come to think of as a true friend. She had become something of a guide to me in the early days here, helping me navigate the village and offering advice on everything from local customs to how to make a proper Italian espresso. Her sharp wit and wisdom had been a comfort when I felt lost, and her companionship had kept me from feeling completely isolated. She greeted me with a warm hug and a knowing smile. "You look happy, Eleanor. It's been a while since I've seen you this content." I smiled back, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within me. I am, I said. I've finally figured out what it means to live for myself. It's funny. It sounds so simple, but it's taken me this long to understand it. Par's eyes twinkled as she nodded. It's never easy, is it? Especially for women like us. We spend so much of our lives looking after others, making sure they're okay, that we forget to check in with ourselves. I hadn't expected her to understand so completely, but she did. She was a widow, too, and had raised her children on her own. Like me, she had spent decades putting others' needs ahead of her own. We were two women, older now, learning how to carve out space for ourselves in a world that had always expected us to give. Do you ever regret it? I asked her, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Regret? She repeated, her voice thoughtful. Regret what? Leaving your old life behind, putting your needs last for so long. Do you wish you'd done it differently? Par stopped walking, and I followed her gaze as she looked out over the village, her face softening as though remembering something distant. I don't regret it, Eleanor, but I do wish I'd realized sooner that I had a right to my own happiness. It took me far too long to get to that point. But you're doing it right. You've learned earlier than I did how to live for yourself. Don't waste that. Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. I had spent so many years feeling like my happiness was something to be earned, something I had to wait for. Wait for my children to be grown, wait for my husband to need me less, wait for the right time to take a step back. But the truth was, there would never be a right time. If I didn't take charge of my own happiness now, when would I? That evening, I went back to the villa with a new sense of purpose. I had been walking around, letting life happen to me, but now it felt like it was time for me to start living with intention. I had the space, the time, and the freedom to explore what I wanted out of this life. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I sat on the terrace that night, looking out over the hills, the stars just beginning to appear. I felt small in the grand scheme of the world, but not in a way that made me feel insignificant. It was humbling in the best possible way. The world was so vast, so full of possibilities, and yet here I was, finding peace in a small corner of it. The weight of everything that had happened over the past few months, the grief, the distance from my children, the struggle for my own autonomy, seemed to dissipate in the quiet of the evening. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the beauty around me, but for the life I was finally living. I had found a way to create a space for myself that was free from the pressures of others. I was no longer a wife, a mother, or a caretaker. I was Eleanor. And that was enough. The next morning, I woke up early, ready to begin the next chapter of my life. I had spent too long in the shadows of others' expectations. Now it was time to live out the dreams I had forgotten, to become the person I had once been, and more than that, the person I had always been meant to be. It was a slow process, this rebuilding of my life, but with each passing day, I felt stronger, and I knew deep down that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As spring bloomed in Castelnuovo, the village seemed to transform right alongside me. The flowers in the garden flourished, their vibrant colors mirroring the way I was beginning to feel inside. Each morning, I walked through the market, inhaling the scent of fresh bread and herbs, exchanging lighthearted greetings with the locals who had become more like family than I had ever imagined. The more I spent time here, the more it felt like a rebirth, my second chance at life. In the months that had passed, I had created a life that was mine alone, free from the expectations of others. I had stopped waiting for something to change, for a sign that it was time. I had realized that the time had already come. It was now, in this moment, and I was the one who had to make the choices. But as much as I had embraced my new life, there were still moments when the weight of my old life lingered. The phone calls from Brian still came, though they had become fewer and farther between. It was clear that he still didn't understand why I had left, why I had made the choice to stay in Italy instead of returning to the life I had built in the States. The guilt he tried to instill in me had faded, but it wasn't gone entirely. I knew I needed to stand firm in my decision, but the pull of family, even from a distance, was powerful. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the terrace, the phone rang again. I hesitated for a moment before answering. I knew it was Brian, but this time, something felt different. He didn't leave a message, and I decided it was time to stop running from these conversations. Mom? His voice sounded tired, worn out. I wanted to talk to you. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I don't know how to make sense of it. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet hum of the wind through the trees. The peace of the village surrounded me, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the rush to respond or fill the silence. This was my moment to decide what I wanted to say. I know you don't understand, Brian, I said softly, but I need you to know that this is not about you or Emily. It's about me. I needed to do this for myself, for my own peace. I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line, a long, frustrated sound. I don't know, Mom. I just can't wrap my head around it. You've always been there for us. You've always put everyone else first. And now you're just gone. You're not even trying to come back. It's like you're abandoning us. The words hit me harder than I expected. Abandoning them? I had spent years putting their needs above my own, sacrificing my own desires to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife. And now, because I was taking some time for myself, because I was choosing to live my own life, I was the one being abandoned? I'm not abandoning you, Brian, I said, my voice steady, though my heart ached. I'm just living. For the first time, I'm living for myself. I'm not running away from you, from the family. I'm just choosing to be who I am, without the weight of everyone else's expectations on my shoulders. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hang up. But then he spoke, his voice quieter, more thoughtful than before. I get it, Mom. I guess I've been so focused on what I thought was best for you that I didn't stop to think about what you actually needed. I was selfish. He sighed again, and I could hear the heaviness in his breath. I just don't know what to do with myself now. Things aren't the same, and I guess I didn't know how to handle it. I sat there, listening to the vulnerability in his voice, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a shift. It wasn't the kind of shift I had expected, but it was one I welcomed. I had spent so many years feeling guilty for not being able to give enough, for not being able to be everything for everyone. But now I realized I didn't have to be. I had done my part. It was time for me to take the space I needed to heal. I know this is hard, Brian, I said, my voice softer now, but I need you to know something. I'm not leaving you behind. I'm not choosing this life to punish you. I'm choosing it because I need to learn how to live for me. I can't be everything to everyone anymore. I need to be me. The silence on the other end was heavy, but then he spoke again, his voice softer this time. I think I understand. I'm still upset, but I think I get it now. I just want you to be happy, Mom. I just want you to be okay. A warmth spread through me at his words. It wasn't the answer I had hoped for, but it was the answer I needed. Brian was finally seeing me, not as his mother, not as the person he needed to save or fix, but as Eleanor, a woman with her own life, her own needs, her own desires. I am happy, Brian, I said, feeling a smile tug at my lips. I really am. The conversation ended on a more peaceful note than I had expected. I hung up the phone, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. I knew that things with Brian and Emily wouldn't change overnight, but this was a step toward understanding, toward healing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't being pulled in 100 different directions. The next day, I took a long walk through the hills outside the village. The air was crisp, the sky a perfect shade of blue, and I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. As I walked, I thought about the future I was finally allowing myself to imagine. I had started the book that had been sitting inside me for so long. It was slow going, but I was making progress, and with each page I wrote, I felt more and more like the person I had always been, and the person I was becoming. Writing was my therapy, my way of sorting through the pieces of my life, making sense of all the things I had buried for so long. I was learning to give myself grace for the mistakes I had made, for the ways I had let myself shrink to fit into roles I hadn't chosen for myself. As I reached the top of the hill, I paused, looking out over the valley. The view stretched out before me, a tapestry of vineyards, olive groves, and distant hills, all bathed in the soft light of the late afternoon. It was beautiful, and it was mine. I was finally learning to live again, and I wasn't afraid of what came next. The future was wide open, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to walk toward it on my own. The days grew longer, and as summer edged its way into Castelnuovo, something inside me began to shift. The once unfamiliar rhythm of my life here, a life lived for myself, had become second nature. I woke up each day feeling like I had reclaimed a part of myself I had long forgotten. Every morning felt like a fresh start, a new opportunity to embrace the life I was building. I had stopped looking over my shoulder at the life I'd left behind, stopped wondering if I was making the right decision. But even as I settled into this new chapter, I couldn't help but think about the family I had left behind. It was strange, but the longer I stayed here, the more distant the past seemed. The world that Brian, Emily, and the rest of them occupied felt farther away now, as though it belonged to another version of me. I wasn't running from them anymore, but I had created a space where I could breathe without the weight of their expectations. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden with my journal, the sun warm on my face, I received a message from Lucy. I hadn't heard from her in a few weeks, and I had begun to wonder if she had accepted the distance between us, or if she, too, was struggling with the changes. Her message was simple, but the words held a depth I hadn't expected. "Mom, I'm coming to visit you. I need to see you. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I need to talk. I'll be in Italy next month. Can we meet?" I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. Part of me was hesitant. So much had changed in the time since I'd left, and I wasn't sure how our reunion would feel. But another part of me, a part I had almost forgotten existed, felt a rush of excitement at the thought of seeing her. I had spent so many years being everything to everyone else, but this was about her and me, no one else. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to think about it, to prepare myself. I had spent so much time in this peaceful isolation that I wasn't sure how to navigate the world of family dynamics anymore. I didn't want to go back to old patterns, to slip into the role I had always played. I needed to show Lucy who I was now, stronger, more independent, more at peace. The day I got Lucy's message, I went to the market, like I did most days, to pick up fresh produce for dinner. As I walked through the rows of vendors, the smells of ripe tomatoes and basil filling the air, I couldn't shake the thought of Lucy's visit. It felt like a turning point, like the world was pulling me back to confront something I had been avoiding. But I was ready, or at least I told myself I was. I ran into Par on my way back. She was tending to a small herb garden by the side of her house, the bright green of the basil and mint standing out against the faded stone walls. "You look deep in thought, Eleanor," she said with a knowing smile, wiping her hands on her apron. "I got a message from Lucy," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "She's coming to visit. I haven't seen her in so long. I don't know what to expect." Par nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. She had been through similar changes in her own life, though hers had come from a different place. She had raised children too, and had watched them grow up and move on. The empty nest had been just as much a transformation for her as it had been for me. "You've been living for yourself for so long, Eleanor. Don't let that change just because someone is coming to visit," she said gently. "Be who you are now, not who you were before. Lucy will see that." Her words settled in my chest like a balm. Par had a way of making the hard truths sound simple. It wasn't about returning to who I had been or slipping back into old patterns. It was about meeting Lucy as the woman I had become. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. I wasn't sure what to expect when Lucy arrived, but I knew that I couldn't go back to the old dynamic we had. I needed to be clear about who I was now. When the day finally arrived, I found myself pacing the villa, looking out the window every few minutes, waiting for her. My heart was pounding, my hands slightly trembling. I hadn't realized how much I had missed her until that moment, how much I longed for that connection. At last, the car pulled up in front of the villa, and I saw her step out, her familiar figure with a little more weight in her step than I remembered. She looked older, more mature, but her eyes, those same eyes I had watched grow up, were full of emotion. I walked out to meet her, and before I could say anything, she was in my arms, holding me tightly, as if afraid to let go. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so much." I held her there for a long moment, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. I had missed her too, more than I had realized. Finally, I pulled away, holding her at arm's length to look at her. "You look beautiful, Lucy." She smiled, though there was a sadness in her expression. "So do you, Mom. You look like you've found yourself." We sat on the terrace, sharing a pot of tea as the sun began to set. The conversation started slowly, like a delicate dance between us. I didn't want to overwhelm her with everything I had learned, everything I had become in the months since I had left. But I also didn't want to hide the truth. I wanted her to see me, to see who I was now. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mom," Lucy said, her voice quiet. "I realized something after I sent that message. I think I've been holding on to the old version of you, the one who took care of everyone, who put herself last, and I didn't want to lose that. But I don't think I ever realized how much you had sacrificed to be that person." Her words hit me like a wave, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. It wasn't about my role as a mother, as a wife, or as someone who had always been there. It was about me, the person who had lived in the shadow of others' needs for so long. "I wasn't living, Lucy," I said softly. "I was surviving. I was doing what I thought I should do, not what I wanted. And when I came here, when I finally let go of everything I thought I had to be, I started living. For the first time in my life, I started living for me." Lucy nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding. "I think I get it, Mom. I think I've been holding on to the past, too. Holding on to the idea of who you were, instead of seeing you for who you are now." The conversation stretched into the evening, and by the time the stars were twinkling above us, I realized how much had changed between us. Lucy had come to see me not just as her mother, but as a person, as a woman with her own life, her own needs, and her own desires. And for the first time in years, I felt a connection with her that wasn't based on duty or expectation. When Lucy left the next morning, I felt a bittersweet sense of peace. She was going back to her life, but something between us had shifted. She had seen the truth of who I was now, and that made all the difference. We were no longer two people bound by old roles. We were equals, learning to navigate a new relationship, one based on understanding and mutual respect. As the days passed, I felt more and more certain that I had made the right decision. Castelnuovo was my sanctuary, but it was the people I had met and the connection I had with Lucy that made it truly feel like home. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to choose between the past and the present. I could hold both, the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming, and still live in the peace of this moment. Life is a journey of self-discovery, and it's never too late to choose to live for yourself. Often we find ourselves caught in the expectations of others, whether it's family, friends, or society, putting our own needs and desires aside in the name of duty. But the truth is, living for others at the cost of your own happiness leads to resentment and exhaustion. The first step to reclaiming your life is to recognize your own worth and give yourself permission to pursue your dreams, no matter how unconventional they may seem. Embrace the quiet moments and listen to your inner voice. It's telling you what you need, not what others expect. Don't be afraid to let go of what's familiar or comfortable, because real growth happens when we step outside of our comfort zones. Surround yourself with people who see you for who you are, not who they want you to be. And above all, remember that your life is your own to live. No one else can define your happiness, and it's up to you to create the future you want. Be kind to yourself, take risks, and never be afraid to choose your own path, even if it's different from what others expect.